piece of pottery for the purpose we'll say in a second. Nor can you cut paper to salt with it a salty fish. I'm sorry, to roast with it a salty fish. Now they would roast the fish, the salty fish, on a metal stove. The problem is that the metal stove was quite hot and would burn the fish. So therefore, they always had like a pad in between the fish and the stove, or the oven, whichever, the stove. So either the pad in between the fish and the stove was this shard, this piece of broken pottery, or a piece of paper that was soaked with oil. So if you're going to break the earthenware vessel to get your shard to use as a pad, that's called, at least midrabanan, according to rabbinic law, that's called making utensil. You can't do that on Yontif. You're cutting the paper, not in a way that cutting itself is a problem. You're randomly cutting it. There's no special measurement or anything like that. But at the end of the day, why are you doing it? You want to use it again to be the pad to roast the fish. That is considered, for the laws of Yontif, making a utensil, and you may not do that. Next. Ve'ein garfin tano v'chirayim avo machabshin. What that means is that you may not shovel out the stove or the oven or the stove, but you can press down. What it means like this. They say here, ovens and stoves were plastered on the inside. Mm-hmm. So it was not unusual for pieces of plaster to fall to the oven floor and hinder the cooking. Removing the fallen plaster is forbidden on Yontif because it repairs the oven or stove by making it fully usable again. Meaning we are not talking about here, again, when those shards, when the piece of plaster fall down, and now you would want to remove them. That's not a deraisa fixing, repairing a utensil. But again, it's repairing a utensil enough that the sages said, but the Chachamim said, you can't do it on Yontif. So to go ahead and to shovel out those pieces of the plaster, they said you can't do that. It's interesting to note, which Rabbi Tanur points out, that let's say there's so much plaster that you actually can't use the oven. There, the Chachamim took away their prohibition. They said you could shovel it out. Mm-hmm. Meaning they didn't take as far to say, well, if you can't use it at all, that's really repairing. No, it's the same level and halacha of repairing. But the point is, though, that if you can't use it because of that, then they suspended their prohibition. Mm-hmm. If it's difficult to use but still usable, then they say, okay, no shoveling out the pieces of plaster. Okay? Now, another point that's important to point out is the fact that one can ask, well, why am I taking the plaster out? So that I can cook. And I can cook on Yontif. Mm-hmm. We're allowed to do malacha. We're allowed to do typically private activity on Shabbos on Yontif for cooking. So why wouldn't you say that shoveling out the plaster from the stove is also fruit preparation? I need to be able to cook. The answer is that it's a step before. Mm-hmm. It's not what you actually do to prepare the food. It's what you're doing to prepare so that I can prepare the food. That's called machshirei oichel nefesh, preliminaries to preparing food. This Tana, the author of this Mishna holds that machshirei oichel nefesh, the preliminaries for preparing food, are not permissible on Yontif. Only what's considered the actual preparing of the food itself. Avol machapshin. But the Mishnah says, but you could press down. What does it mean press down? It means ashes and dirt on the floor of the oven. You could push them down. That means like this: bread would be baked by pasting dough to the inside of the walls of the oven's walls. If hot dirt or ashes gathered on the oven floor, they would have to be pressed down so that they do not touch the bread and burn it. So you want to push down the ashes so as not to burn the bread. That's not called repairing the oven. Meaning we don't see that as repairing the oven. That's dealing with the ashes. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with, again, it's interesting. The plaster that fell off, that's seen as preparing. Just going ahead and pushing down the ashes is not considered. The Chachamim did not see that as did not consider that repairing enough to say that it should be forbidden to do, or they allowed it because you don't want to burn the bread. So therefore, in this kind of case, they said you're allowed to do it. And the way they explain it here is it's not. They don't. It's not. The way they explain it is that it's not considered a repair of the oven. All right. I mean, it doesn't sound like maybe it's a repair, but they suspended it. It sounds like we don't consider it a repair of the oven itself. Okay, broken pieces off the wall is repairing the oven. Just the ashes that are gathering that need just to be pressed down, that's not considered a repair. Okay, next case. You do not take two barrels and put them next to each other in order to put a pot on top. This was a makeshift oven. This was not barrels of wood. They were made out of clay. And what they would do to make a makeshift oven is they would take the two barrels, put them next to each other, put a fire in between, and sit the pot on top of the barrels. That would be your makeshift oven. And when Mishna says, you cannot take two barrels and put them next to each other in order to rest the pot on top of them. Why is that? So the explanation is because it resembles baina, it resembles building. Building what? So the way they explained it is, it's not like I'm building a stove. Doesn't seem to be so much the problem. The problem is this stove is like a building with the pot as the roof and the barrels as the walls. It resembles a building. And therefore, the Chachamim said, you can't do it. And you cannot support the pot with a block of wood or with a piece of wood, nor can you do the same. You cannot use a piece of wood to support a door. So you have this pot. It's not even, it's not stable. So you want to take a piece of wood and stick it under it as a support, as a wedge, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you want to do. So this time is, and the same thing, whatever reason you're doing that with the door, the same thing regarding supporting a door. You can't do that. Why can't you do that? That's because according to this Tana, wood, we're saying is if wood is not muktzah because you're planning on using it for firewood, you cannot use it for anything else. By wood, we say if he designated it to be, meaning we're saying wood itself should be muktzah. If you decide I'm going to use it for firewood, if you have in mind to use it for firewood, it's not muktzah. But it's only not muktzah as firewood. If you use it for something else, you can't. Unless you were to actually designate the wood for that purpose. But just because I went ahead and designated it for firewood doesn't allow me to go ahead and use it for something else. Then the Mishnah says, you cannot lead an animal with a stick. You drive an animal with a stick on Yontif. Why? So first of all, not because the stick is muktzah, because if I designated the stick to use it for that, it's not muktzah. If I designated before Yontif to use it. Even if I designated before Yontif to use it to drive the animal, I can't. Because you typically use a stick to drive an animal, as they explained down here. A stick is usually used to drive an animal when it is going a long distance, such as to the market. And we don't want people to think that they're going to the market on Yontif. Rabbi Shimon says it's permissible. He's not concerned with people thinking that by doing this, you're taking it to the market, and therefore they say it is permissible. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.